Hey everyone, it's Friday, so that means it is time for another MTG Top 10. I'm Neat Sahone, and each week I bring you guys another MTG related Top 10 list. Before we get talking about the list though, I want to let you know that I recently started a Patreon campaign. If you enjoy the content that I produce and want to see it get even better, you can help me make it better by donating there. The link to my Patreon is in the description for the video. Anyway, this week I will chronicle the top 10 anthems in Magic's history. The rankings for this list have to do with how impactful each of these cards were on the competitive Magic scene. As we go over each card, I will talk about the appearances it made in top 8s at the Premier Tournament scene, and talk about what made the card so good. I was inspired to make this list because the newest anthem in Magic's history, Always Watching, which you can see here, has made a strong showing since it appeared in Standard, appearing in several Standard decks that did well at Pro Tour, Shadows over Innistrad. So, first of all, we have to talk about what exactly this list is, what an anthem is, and so forth. And to do that, we have to go all the way back to 1998, when Glorious Anthem was first printed. Glorious Anthem was a card that you can see here that was a 3-mana enchantment that gave your whole team +1/+1. So when we say Anthem effect, we're talking about a permanent pump effect that gives most of your creatures +1/+1. In the case of Glorious Anthem, it is all of them. I did want to be fairly restrictive on the idea of what an anthem is. I didn't want to include cards that only pump a certain set of creatures, and so even though some cards are very good that are basically anthem effects in the decks that make them, like Intangible Virtue, Favorable Winds, and Honor of the Pure, I didn't include these because they're not exactly in the spirit of the original Glorious Anthem, because they only pump one group of creatures, whether it's creature tokens, creatures with flying, or white creatures. There are other creatures that fall into this, other cards that fall into this area as well, and I didn't include them on the list. If we had to include every effect that pumped a bunch of creatures, we'd have to include basically every lord, and things sort of get out of hand when we have to do that. I did include some anthems that pump all but one type of creature. I thought of those as a little more inclusive than the others. So anyway, that's sort of the criteria for me for the list. Permanent pump effect for the whole team, or almost the whole team, and not a temporary pump effects, and not pump effects that only affect certain members of your team. So from there, we will go ahead and move to number 10. At number 10, I have Marshall's Anthem. This card was printed in Commander 2015 and thus has never been legal in Standard or Modern. It has also never seen play in Legacy or Vintage. However, it is a staple in Commander where it appears in basically any white Commander deck, or at least it should. It provides the usual Anthem effect for 1 more mana, but it also offers the choice of Multi-Kicker, which allows you to bring a creature back from your graveyard for each time you pay the cost, making this an Anthem effect that can build its own enhanced army if it needs to. I think it deserves to be mentioned among the best anthems in the game's history, despite a lack of tournament appearances, because it is such a sought-after card for Commander. From here, though, all the cards are cards that appeared on the tournament scene. Although here at number 9, we have a card that appeared more on the limited tournament scene. That said, I think it was a important enough creature in Rise of the Eldrazi drafts that it deserves to be on this list, and it is Kabira Vindicator. It was one of the best uncommons you could get, basically, in Rise of the Eldrazi drafts. It never saw play in Constructed, but as a 4-mana 2/4, which is already a little bit, is only a little bit below the rate you want to pay for a creature, it's already pretty good. And then if you level it up just twice, you get an Anthem effect, and it turns even bigger, becomes a 3/6. And then if you get to level it up all the way to level 5, it got +2/+2. And levelers were very good, especially the good levelers like this one, were very good in Rise of Eldrazi Limited. Basically, it was an uncommon creature who needed to be dealt with immediately against anybody who played it. In the Pro Tour that was Rise of the Eldrazi Limited, Pro Tour San Juan in 2010, Kabira Vindicator appeared in 2 different decks in the top 8, showing that it was a great card to have in that limited format. From here on, the cards will all have appeared in Constructed, though, I promise. At number 8, we have Gaia's Anthem. It is the color-shifted version of its older brother, Glorious Anthem. It was originally printed in Planar Chaos in 2007, a set which had several color-shifted versions of cards, meaning cards that are identical but are slightly different because they're a different color. And usually these color shifts happen in areas where the color pie had changed over time, and it made sense for green to be pumping a whole team just as much as it made sense for white to. And these 2 cards are identical, other than one costs double green and the other costs double white. Unfortunately, though, for Gaia's Anthem, it hasn't quite gotten the love its more popular brother has. That said, it has still managed to appear in deck lists and high-level events, showing up primarily in the year 2007 in Time Spiral block decks, It made an appearance at Grand Prix Florence as a 4-of in a red-green aggro deck, which also happened to be one of the first decks to do well that had Tarmogoyf in it, and this was a top 8 appearance. It also made an appearance in the top 8 of Grand Prix Kyoto in 2007. It hasn't managed to appear in any format other than block, though it is in lots of casual elf decks I've come up against in my life. So let's see what we have at number 7. At number 7, we have Angel of Jubilation. This angel is an example of an Anthem effect that gives the effect to most other creatures, but not quite all of them. If your creatures are black, it won't pump them. Obviously, though, you can build your deck in such a way that it will include all of your creatures. On top of that, the angel shuts down any sort of sacrifice or life-paying effect, which is not an insignificant line of text, and neither is the fact that it's a 3/3 flyer. This card appeared in a lot of sideboards of the black-white token deck that was dominant in Standard in 2012, including a deck that won Grand Prix Atlanta that year. It has also been a card to show up in various incarnations of mono-white hate bears in Modern, because it performs the important work of pumping your hate bears like Thalia and Aven Mindcensor, while also having a hate bear effect itself. Once in play in Modern, your opponent can no longer use Thoughtseize, no longer use fetch lands, and so forth. So at number 6, we have Eldrazi Monument. This is one of the more impressive effects that an Anthem has ever generated, as it makes your creatures pretty impossible to deal with, making them not only have an Anthem effect, but have flying and indestructible. It does come with some cost, as you have to lose a creature every turn to defeat it. This card appeared in decks that could take advantage of the fact that they were easily able to pay the cost, such as in a standard vampire deck that went undefeated in the standard portion of Worlds in 2009. This deck ran cards like Bloodghast, who could come back from the graveyard every turn to feed the monument, and a large number of creatures who could benefit from the bonus. The card reemerged at Worlds 2010, this time appearing in a standard elf deck that went undefeated on day 1. Several versions of elf decks modeled after that one that appeared in Worlds also played the deck to high finishes at various state and regional tournaments in both 2010 and 2011. So from Eldrazi Monument, we go to number 5, which is where we have the newest Anthem effect of them all, Always Watching. This card has only been legal in Standard for a few weeks, but its presence has already been felt. It appeared in several decks that finished in the top 8 at the first big Standard event it was legal in, the Star City Games Open in Baltimore in 2016. It also made a strong showing at Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad. While it isn't in any of the decks that were in the top 8 of that tournament, it appeared in the decks of 4 players who finished 8-2 in the standard portion of the tournament, but didn't do well enough in draft to make it into the top 8. I think Always Watching will be a consistent presence in Standard for a little while, and as it appears in any carnation of a human aggro deck that might emerge. This Anthem is very powerful because it grants your creatures vigilance, and that means that you don't have to race people in the traditional sense because you can swing and block instead of picking one or the other. And it doesn't grant that effect to tokens, making it, another somewhat limited Anthem effect, but it affects enough of your creatures that I think we can call it an Anthem. So that's number 5. Let's see what we have at number 4. Number 4, we have Spear of Heliod. This is a glorious Anthem with some upside, basically. Not only do you get the Anthem effect, the Spear can also kill a creature if it's done damage to you. It's not terrible utility to tack onto an already good card like Glorious Anthem. It does have some slight downsides that Glorious Anthem doesn't have, though, such as being removable by both enchantment and artifact removal and being legendary, so you don't really want to be running 4 of them in your deck because you can't stack several of them in play. This card appeared regularly while it was in Standard, first appearing at a high-profile event at Grand Prix Vienna in 2013, where it appeared as a 2-of in a Boros aggro deck that finished in the top 8. It also made an appearance in a black-white aggro deck that won Grand Prix Shizuoka that same year, and it also appeared in a deck that finished in the top 16 of Grand Louisville in that same year. So that's number 5. At number 3, we have Gideon, ally of Zendikar. This relative newcomer to Magic already has a very impressive resume. Part of what makes him so good is that he does more than just an Anthem effect. He can also build his own army in the form of knights, or he can make himself into a brawler and attack the opponent. However, the fact that the turn you play him, you get a permanent unremovable Anthem effect if you want one is very relevant, and the decks that run him often want to go wide and use the -4 anyway. As I mentioned, Gideon already has an impressive resume, appearing in 4 of the top 8 decks in the first Pro Tour he could be played in at Pro Tour Battle for Zendikar in 2015, including the deck that won it all. It appeared in 3 different top 8 decks at Grand Prix Indianapolis in 2015, again, including the deck that won it all. 2 different decks featuring Gideon appeared in the top 8 of Grand Prix Brussels in 2015, and 4 decks featuring the Planeswalker were in the top 8 of Grand Prix Kobe in 2015. Gideon wouldn't be a card that would only be good for 1 year, though, as he has had a strong showing in 2016 so far as well. 3 decks featuring him appeared in the top 8 of Grand Prix Oakland in 2016, and he appeared as well in second place at Grand Prix Houston in 2016. He also did very well at the most recent Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad, appearing as a 4 of in the deck that won the whole thing. So he has quite an impressive resume. But I do think that by the time he has rotated out of Standard, he may usurp maybe even both the first and second place people on this list. But for now, he sits at number 3. At number 2, we have Glorious Anthem, and this is the card that started it all. This card has had a long time to compile an impressive resume since it was printed all the way back in the late 1990s, and that gives it an advantage over a card like Gideon, who I think, as I said, could potentially surpass the original Anthem before he rotates out of Standard. But for now, Glorious Anthem comes in at second place. It took a couple of years for the card to catch on, and it didn't make its first major tournament appearance until it appeared in a deck that finished in the top 8 at U.S. Nationals in 2000. From then on, it became a fixture in white weenie decks over the years. It appeared in a Kithkin tribal deck that had an undefeated day 1 at Worlds in 2008, and it took 3 of the top 8 slots at Pro Tour Kyoto in 2009, appearing as a 4 of in a Kithkin aggro deck, as well as 2 black-white tokens decks. Black-white tokens would go on to be the most dominant deck in that standard format, and in the end, Glorious Anthem managed to net 8 more top 8s at high-level events like Grand Prix and Pro Tours, not to mention making strong appearances at more regional tournaments as well. So the Anthem that started it all isn't number 1. Can you guess what it is? I think many of you probably have, but I'll go ahead and tell you that at number 1 we have Murari's Wake. This was originally printed way back in Judgment, and this card was incredibly powerful and one of the best decks of the time, simply called Wake because this card was central to it doing well. The deck was so dominant that 4 of the decks that made the top 8 in Worlds that year featured Murari's Wake, and the deck that won it all was one of these Wake decks. While the deck didn't have a huge amount of success outside of Worlds that year, the sheer dominance of the deck in 2003, when it was considered the deck to beat, and the fact that the deck depended completely on its Anthem, Murari's Wake, to be good, made this card deserving of being considered the top Anthem effect in Magic's history. Decks made around it ran token generators with X mana costs, and the Wake synergized perfectly with those, allowing you to generate a massive amount of mana to make lots of tokens, and then pumping all the tokens once they came into play. The deck was definitely something to be feared. Well, that does it for this week's Top 8. I hope you enjoyed it. Do you think I underrated or overrated any Anthem effects? Do you have an idea for a future Top 8? Post any and all of those things in the comments. And thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe as well.